Welcome to the Creative Chats Podcast with Mike Brennan. Welcome, friends, to another episode of Creative Chats. It's the podcast for artists, makers, and content creators where we talk about creativity, the creative process, and story. I'm your host, Mike Brennan. You can connect with me and check out some of my work on my website, which is mikebrennan.me. And while you're over there, I want you to swing on by the tab that says books. It's under shop. I've self-published 8 books, and there's everything from my first book, which is Dear Snow, One Man's Angry Rant Against Winter. Yes, it's about how much I hate snow and winter. And there are other books there as well, like Make Fun a Habit and the Daily Creative Habit Journal, which I talk about all the time on this podcast. And so if you're interested in any of those books, including my latest, which is called Blue, A Story of Letting Go, that's a story created for those of us who have to let go, who are maybe in a season of grieving or loss somehow and trying to find our way through. That is a resource for you as well. And I would love for you to check out any of those books if you find them helpful. You can find those also on Amazon.com as well. Today, I want to talk about something that came out of my time last week. I was speaking here in Franklin, Tennessee at an event called Mental Health Marketing. And a little aside, funny story, last year, I was at the location where this event is held. It's called The Factory in Franklin. And I was with a friend and we were wondering what this event was. And so we kind of crashed. We went into this event just to poke around and find out what was happening. And we met some of the vendors there, and on the way out, bumped into the guy who actually produces the event. And so got to talk with him a little bit, went on our way, didn't think much else about it other than, wow, it's kind of cool that they're having this here and might be something I want to see if I can be involved in the future. So fast forward a little bit, I'm at another event, and this time it's in Orlando, Florida. And this guy that I met there, another speaker, we get to talking and he says, I need to introduce you to my friend Steve. Now, Steve is the guy who is the one who put the event on for Mental Health Marketing. So he makes an introduction. Long story short, I end up on Steve's podcast called The Boost earlier this year. And then they opened up for speaker applications for their event. And I applied, and then I just spoke at their event last week. And so sometimes you just never know what may happen as a series of events unfold if you push yourself to go places that you wouldn't normally go, or even sometimes just getting out of the box, meeting people and talking with people, because relationships are the things that open up opportunities. And so just as a little aside, if you're wondering how to start to see some opportunities, how to grow some things with your creativity, get out to some events locally and even non-locally. Get among people, have conversations, make those connections. So while I'm at this event, there's several conversations that are happening, and there's a theme that kind of arises. And this comes a little bit out of my time speaking, because I talked about my own mental health journey and creativity and how I walked away from my creativity for 10 years, suffered from depression, came back to it, but really asking the question, can I come back to this? Is this even possible? And part of my story is also sharing the fact that I was a kid who was your typical artist kid, right? I was drawing all the time. I was trying to paint as best I could with watercolor. I remember the first experience I had with watercolor, I put way too much water on the page. And of course, it starts to curl up or it starts to get all messy. And I was like, this is dumb. I don't like this. I just didn't really understand how watercolor worked. But anyway, I was sharing about how creativity, and specifically art and drawing, it was a part of my childhood experience. It was something that no one had to tell me to do. I just did it because I enjoyed it. It was pure expression. It was pure curiosity. And I remember distinctly getting some comic books and some comic strips from either the newspaper or they would compile them into books. Characters like Garfield, like Bloom County, Calvin and Hobbes, Peanuts, I mean, there were so many that I was drawn towards. And I would sit with these comics and I would study them. I would think, well, how does the artist draw eyes? Are they just little dots? Are they circles with a line halfway through and then kind of the eye, the pupil in the middle there? What does it look like when the character is expressing different things? If they're tired, if they're angry, like what happens to their face? I remember looking at all these comics and trying to mimic them and trying my best to understand how can I make those marks? And then how can I make my own characters maybe that use some of the same types of shapes and marks? And so all this was happening as a foundation for me with my creativity. And I didn't have projects, I didn't have things that I was working towards, building a portfolio, right? This is me being a kid just drawing because I loved to draw. And more than that, I loved the characters. I loved the storylines. I loved, even as I got older, comic books, the Fantastic Four, Spider-Man. I collected a lot of Star Wars comic books too, X-Men. I mean, all these comic books started to inform my world. It was the storylines, it was the characters, yes, it was the drawings. And that had to find its way out in my world as well. And so what I would do is I would make my own greeting cards when I was real young for family members. And I've shared about this before, but I distinctly remember creating some cards and giving it to my parents and seeing their faces light up and them saying, you did this for me? And I would be like, yeah. And they would be smiling ear to ear and they would say, thank you so much. And they'd put it up on the refrigerator, right, with a magnet. And that told me that I created something valuable. And as I look back on it years later, I understood that there was an exchange that was happening, that I could create something, I could make something out of nothing, my imagination, and give it to someone else and see their face light up and somehow impact their world, even if it's just a smile. And I thought to myself, that's what I want to do for the rest of my life. That is the goal. That's the mission. And that's what I set out to do. Now, coming back to like what it was, the theme that was arising is this childhood creativity, this thought of what did we do when we were kids? What did that look like? I ask that question a lot of my guests here on this show. It's always interesting, the answers that I get. Sometimes it is drawing, sometimes it's building with blocks, sometimes it's music, sometimes it's dance or acting, singing. And I love to trace that to say, what of that still remains today for that person? Like years later, they're an adult now. They're maybe in a field that does not look like it's connected to anything that has to do with their childhood creativity. But is there a thread that's still there? And a lot of times it's something that is still there because it's in their DNA. Like they're not playing with blocks for their career, but maybe they're building things. They're using that same sense of, I love to take elements and put them together and figure out, engineer how something can come together and work. That was born when they were a kid, and now it looks different, but it's still there. It's still very much the same type of process that's at work. And so talking about what did we do when we were kids and do we still do that? And specifically zeroing in on creativity in maybe some of the drawing, painting, dancing, more of the arts, if you will, does that still have a place in our lives? Now, if you're like me, you went into this as a career. You said, I love this so much that I want to do this and make money from this. And that starts a career path that, I went to art school and worked in several different agencies in New York City. And what ends up happening is that you tie your creativity to your livelihood, and then there's a pressure that is there because you need your creativity to work so that you can have income, so that you can have a career path. And it's easy to lose the joy and that play from when you were a kid. Because when you're a kid, it's just do whatever you want to do. I'm doing this because I enjoy this. I'm not really thinking about it too much. I'm just messing around. I'm doing this because it's fun. And as we get older, there are outside voices that tell us, don't color outside the lines, that tell us, don't use those colors, use these colors, that tell us it has to look a certain way, that it has to conform, that, I mean, fill in the blank. We all have those voices. We all have had those experiences where even today we can hear those voices very clearly and they shape us. And a lot of times they knock us off track. Either they stop us from doing the thing that we once loved to do because somehow we feel like we're not enough, we're not good enough, we're not talented enough. It doesn't look like what it's supposed to look like. I mean, there are tons of reasons why. Or if you did press through and it becomes a career, we end up shackling things to our creativity that we do ourselves. In other words, there's pressure behind because it has to be a certain level. We have to be professional. We have to be on our A game all the time. And we're only as good as the last thing that we've produced. And we need a killer portfolio of work or body of work. And everything's very competitive. Everything is very cutthroat because there's a lot of people and maybe not as many opportunities. And especially today, as the landscape shifts and as AI is in the mix and takes over a lot of things in process, there's people scrambling to figure out, what does this look like? And even, what does this look like professionally for me? Is an industry going away? Like, so many questions and so much is shifting. But I want to challenge us to go back to that place when we were kids, the thing that we loved, the thing that brought us joy, the place of discovery, the place that reminded us of who we really are. Maybe there's a journey of rediscovery that needs to happen. And much like when I was suffering from depression and I had put my creativity on a shelf for 10 years, maybe there's something that's happening in your world that is causing you to lean in, a pain point that is causing you to pay attention and perhaps go on a journey to rediscover that part of your creativity. It's hard when you're a creative professional to also maintain a practice that is just yours, a place where I'm expressing the things that I want to express. I was on the hamster wheel for a long time of, well, I'm getting paid for my creativity. I mean, I thought that was the goal. I'm working all day long, creating for other people, but yet I don't really create the things that are important to me anymore. And I'm not even sure if I know what those things would be because I'm leveraging all of my creative efforts for somebody else. It's somebody else's project, somebody else's timelines, somebody else's budget, somebody else's fill in the blank. I mean, it's leveraged for someone else, which that's what it is in the marketplace. And I'm not saying it's a good thing or bad thing. I'm just saying that is what it is. When you're a creative professional, you're using your creative abilities in service to others, and you're getting paid for that. Now, the problem comes when you feel like that's not necessarily enough, because there is something inside of you that still wants to express yourself. And you know that client projects are not the place for you to try certain things, to express certain things that have nothing to do with the creative brief or the project brief. And so if you don't have an outlet for that, what ends up happening is it becomes a low-grade frustration. And I was on this hamster wheel of every day I'm using my creativity for somebody else. I come home and the last thing I had energy for was to do my own creative projects, to think about what is it that's of interest to me. I'm exhausted. And then I go to sleep and I wake up the next day and start it all over again. And every once in a while, maybe where there was more of a time block, I would pull out some things and, some art supplies and try some things. I would try and just mess around and never really feel that fulfilled in it, and certainly not having a vision or direction for it. But it was somehow me trying to listen to that call that was inside of, hey, pay attention to this. This is something that's important because it's tied to who you are. It's tied to how you need to show up, how you want to show up. And you need to create space for this. So thinking back to this conversation, these conversations I was having last week with people, and this importance of keeping this childhood creativity before us. What is that thing? What did it look like? How did we engage with our creativity? how can we make space for that today and practice that? When we were a kid, we didn't have to have somebody telling us to do this. We didn't have to look at a calendar and make sacrifices. If I do this, then I can't do that. We didn't have to worry about budgets, right? I mean, most of the time it was somebody else who bought the crayons. It was somebody else who supplied the paper. Now we have to do all those things for ourselves. And with all of that, we need to ask the question of, is this something that's important to me? Like, truly sit with that question. Is this creative expression something that's important to me? Is this something that once I found it very life-giving? I found it to be joyful. I found it to be something that I could spend hours doing and lose track of time. And it's easy to make excuses to say, well, of course, I was a kid. I didn't have responsibilities. I didn't have to worry about making money, all those things. What did you have to do when you were a kid? Just kind of show up and follow the lead of other people. But there's something there in the past for us to look at, to hold on to practice, keep coming back to. That thing that hasn't let go of you, even if you've tried to let go of it, it's calling you back. It's saying, spend time with me. Spend time with yourself doing this activity. Because in it, you might just rediscover some things that you have lost along the way. That's part of my story. I lost some things. I lost some pieces of me. I lost some joy. I lost some purpose in the midst of still creating things or still trying to figure things out. What did that look like beyond a career, just as a person? And reconnecting with that sense of, I can create something out of nothing, give it to somebody else, and see their face light up. There are many times today where I will create some things that I could charge for easily, but I don't. And it's on a case-by-case basis. I do something every once in a while for, quote, free. I'm not talking about working for free, by the way, of like people abusing that and trying to ask you to do work for free. But what I am saying is, when you love something and you love creating something and you love helping people, you get to choose how you want to engage with that. You get to choose who you want to bless with that or help with that. And so every once in a while, I'm able to do something for somebody through what I create and help them feel seen or heard. You get to make the rules. Just like when you're a kid, what do you want to draw? You draw something and you hand it to somebody and they look at it and they're like, oh, what a nice cow. And then you kind of got mad because you're like, that's not a cow, that's a dog. And they're like, oh, I'm so sorry. I thought it looked like a cow. But you're the one who puts your imagination into it. You're the one who makes the rules. You're the one who says what you want to do, how much time you want to do it, what materials you want to use. It's all up to you. What if we recaptured that? And yes, it's going to mean sacrificing some things, but honestly, you've been sacrificing some things all along right now anyway. And perhaps this frustration has not gone away, but it's only grown. And so what has sacrificing for perhaps not the best things in your life right now led towards? What if you recalibrated and started to make some sacrifices for your creativity, to reclaim it, to enter back into it, to go back to when you were a kid and loved doing those things simply for the joy of creating, not because you were making it into a side hustle, not because you were making it into a career, not because you tied money and performance and all sorts of external awards and validations to things, but because you sat with your creativity and you made something, and it made you smile first, and then maybe made some other people smile. I know it may seem a little bit Pollyanna to try to think about going back to that, but maybe that's what we need to shoot for. This childlike wonder, this place of play, this place of curiosity. When was the last time you got curious about your childhood creativity? Where you spent some time thinking about that activity, thinking about what you used to create, thinking about why it made you feel the way that it did, and what of that activity can you do now, even as an adult? Maybe that's why adult coloring books are so popular, because there's this sense of coming back to something and doing this familiar activity where there's not a whole lot of expectation. There's not a whole lot of stress, right? It's actually a stress reliever to be able to color. I remember several months ago, I was sitting with a coloring page and I started coloring this page in. It was during an event, and I noticed that, wow, I don't remember the last time that I actually did this, sat with a coloring page. And it was funny because my thought was, well, of course I've colored things in. I mean, that's part of what I do as an artist, a visual artist. But I don't remember the last time I didn't start something from scratch and have coloring just be part of a process that was one of many of what I did, as opposed to I'm just sitting here and coloring in something that somebody else has created. It's a very specific and narrow field of decisions to make, and took a lot of pressure off. And yet it still did something in terms of me making something. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be something that yields a piece of work, again, that you're going to sell. The reward is in the act of showing up and creating. And whatever way that you can leverage your time, your money, your interest towards that, you will start to see some life come back. You will start to see a trail emerge because you get curious. You start to engage. You start to say, well, what happens if I do this? What happens if I keep doing this? And suddenly you start to revitalize some places maybe that have been really dormant with you. And maybe that does lead you to a place where you make some things and it becomes a side hustle or becomes a different career or something else. But I think coming back to that place where you're asking the questions of what is it that you love, that you have loved as a kid? What made you love those things? What can you hold on to for yourself? Protect some of that. Have a place, no matter what you do, have a place where you have a creative outlet that's just for you, where there's no outside people telling you, here's a deadline, here's a budget, here's what this has to look like, a committee of people with critiques and feedback. Like, do something just for you because it's life-giving. And then keep doing that. Make that a priority. I know that this is a difficult thing, especially if you've been out of it for a really long time. No one's going to make you do this. This is something that itch that you can't scratch has to become so great that you finally take action, that you finally start to try to do something. And you may be saying to yourself, well, great, this is all wonderful to talk about, but how do I actually do this? This is why I've created some of the resources that I have with Daily Creative Habit. If you've listened to any other podcast episode, you've heard me talk about this all the time. There's the Daily Creative Habit Journal. I'm talking about that not simply because I'm like, hey, buy this journal, but I'm saying this is a tool for you for 90 days for you to figure out, this is what I want to create. I'm setting intention and then taking action. And you're tracking and measuring. Did I do what I said I was going to do? If not, why? And if I did, what did it look like? And what am I learning? And keeping yourself engaged and keeping yourself actually thinking about this whole process of creativity, getting you to be consistent. That's why I do this podcast and talk to guests and ask them questions about their story, about their journey, their path, and try to identify some things that I think no matter what you do creatively, you can hear somebody talk about their experiences and say, this is my takeaway. This is the thing that I was looking for some inspiration or some advice or some insights on. And I found it in somebody else's story. This is why I do some creative coaching as well. When I meet with people to say, hey, let's talk about what's happening creatively with us and let's utilize each other as a community. There's the Daily Creative Habit free Facebook group. It's a great place to start. Get in there with some like-minded people who are creating all sorts of different things. Ask some questions, post some work, engage. Because there are people who may be right next to you who could hold the keys, the answers to something that you've been wrestling with for a really long time. There may be people who are going, hey, I'm trying to come back to my creativity just like you are. And what does that look like for you? How are you trying to recapture some of the creativity from when you were a kid? What's working for you? What's not working for you? It's getting past some of the maybe embarrassment, some of the shame, some of the questions, some of the limiting beliefs that we have. And it's realizing we're all in this together. That's a great place to start. And whatever it is that you do, remember that you're the one, ultimately, at the end of the day, who has agency over your own journey. You're the one who calls the shots. And so if you truly feel like your creativity is something that you want to have a place in your life, you are the one responsible for making time and space and effort for that. And do it in such a way that you're more open-handed, you're not tied to perfectionism, but you're curious and you're active. You're pursuing this. Make the time, put in the effort, and start to see what happens. Track and measure your growth and your progress so that you see some things are actually happening. It's going to be messy. It's going to be imperfect. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to have times when you feel like doing it and other times when you don't feel like doing it. You're going to have maybe some periods where you're really disciplined and other periods where something else in your life happens and you kind of go off track. This creativity thing is a lifelong thing. It's part of who we are. It's part of how we show up. It's important to us because you're listening to this. You're watching this. It wouldn't be so if this wasn't important to you. So the challenge today is think about your childhood, the things you used to do, and how can you take something of that activity? Again, maybe it's not the actual activity itself, but maybe it's the process of how you approach something, the mindset, the curious thinking, the building, the eye that you had or the taste that you had for certain things, taking that into your world today and making room for that, making space for that, and then creating, trying things, being open-handed with this journey, and go to a place of self-discovery, of rediscovery. You may be amazed at what you find. And it may actually impact all the other areas of your life because perhaps you've been looking for a place to rediscover joy and you're not finding that in your work. And maybe you have some difficulties with relationships in your life. And maybe you've got some other stressors financially and all these factors. Maybe this can be a place where you can go and experience some joy. And that joy can start to push out to the other areas of your life. Creativity is important to us. It's not just simply something for kids. It starts as kids, but let's reclaim that creativity for us today. So as I always end these episodes, the charge is go create something. Thanks for listening today. I'd appreciate it if you would subscribe, leave a rating and a review. It really helps this podcast be seen and heard by others.